Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope that the year has started well for you. I hope that your holidays were also pleasant. So let's get to work. The tax cut lies. They appear, and they do so right on cue. What are we talking about? Right before Christmas, I believe it was the 20th of December, the Congress and the Senate passed tax reform, which made significant changes in the tax code not seen in 3 decades. One of the most interesting things about the tax reform legislation is caught up in this clip from a White House spokesman on the day of the vote.
Quite frankly, after the last presidential election, you heard a lot of Democrats doing an autopsy saying we forgot about the middle class. We refused to address the middle class head on. Hillary Clinton couldn't do it. We didn't do it. And then we put forth a bill that actually gives tax cuts to the middle class, about $2,000 on average per family, and no Democrat decides to vote for it. It's absolutely incredible, and I think they're going to pay for it next year.
Exactly. You talk about the middle class. You talk about you want to help them, and one way you can help anyone has to do with allowing them to have more money, particularly when it's the money that they earn. But when you are given that opportunity, you vote against it. As a matter of fact, not one Democrat in either the House or the Senate supported the tax reform legislation. Kind of harkens back to Obamacare, where no Republicans voted for that. Here's going to be the difference. Obamacare was a financial disaster and a disaster in other ways and areas as well. The people who lost insurance, which the media never talks about, the people whose premiums and deductibles went skyward, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about people being charged for insurance services that they would never use. They don't talk about the 27-year-old male who's being charged a policy that talks about, I'm sorry, maternity care. You don't need that. Neither does a postmenopausal woman. But that was also, at least for a time, part of the Obamacare approved health insurance plans. The difference with this is going to be tax reform is going to help everybody. How can you say that? Because every time income tax rates are cut in these United States, the people of America benefit. Oh, and another annoying fact, tax revenues increase. They did it every time. There have only been 4 times in American history since the 16th Amendment was ratified, giving Congress the ability to come after your money. Rates have been cut 4 times. They were cut in the 1920s. They were cut in the 1960s. They were cut again in the 1980s. They were cut again in the 2000s. What people, for whatever reason, choose to overlook is that every time it happened, the Treasury was bursting at the seams with the additional revenue. Well, what about the deficits? You know what? If you go from making $50,000 a year to $100,000 a year, but you end up with a bigger deficit, you end up more in debt. Is the problem with what you made or with what you spent? That's the issue with deficits. It doesn't matter how much money comes in. It matters how much goes out. Every time there has been a cut, there has been significant increase in revenues. Period. It's what Congress chooses to do with the quote-unquote excess money. And they get away with it because if they're cutting taxes, you get to keep more of your money. It's an interesting thing the way tax rate reductions work. Because the American people get to keep more of their money, they tend to go out and make more money knowing that they'll be able to keep it. As they make more money, even though the rates are lower, there is so much more money, even though it's being taxed at a lower rate, revenues soar. Just that simple. But the Democrats opposed it to a man and woman. They opposed it. Now, another interesting thing about this is what they opposed. Now, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, Bernie Sanders showed up with Jake Tapper to talk about the tax reform bill, and notice the first thing he says, and we'll talk about that more on the other side.
I understand you're not a fan of the tax bill. You don't like the large corporate tax cut, and you're not happy with the tax cuts for the wealthy. But according to the Tax Policy Center, next year, 91% of middle-income Americans will receive a tax cut. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it is a very good thing, and that's why we should have made the tax breaks for the middle class permanent. But what the Republicans did is made the tax breaks for corporations permanent, the tax breaks for the middle class temporary, and according to the Tax Policy Center, that same organization, at the end of 10 years, 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%, 60% of the benefits go to the top 1/10 of 1%. Meanwhile, at the end of 10 years, well over 80 million Americans will be paying more in taxes. 13 million Americans, as a result of this legislation, are going to lose their health insurance. Health care premiums are going up. We got a $1.4 trillion deficit as a result of this bill. And Paul Ryan is going around saying, oh, we have to offset that deficit by cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. To answer your questions, should we have focused on the needs of the middle class? We should have.
The level of dishonesty in Bernie Sanders is chart-breaking. It's ridiculous. But notice the first thing that he said. It's a very good thing that 91% of middle-income earners will get a tax break. He said it's a very good thing. If you really thought it's a very good thing, Mr. Sanders, why didn't you vote for it? Now, the other thing he noticed was that, well, these tax breaks, these rate reductions are going to expire. Well, why are they going to expire? Because the interesting rules, which are a bald-faced lie, in Congress say that, well, you know, we have to be careful of the deficit, and so we're going to cut this back because our analysis shows that if we keep these tax rates in place for longer than 2025, then the deficit's going to blow up. Well, that's never true. Because for that to be the case, then you must be trying to say that you're going to lose revenue with a tax rate reduction, which has never happened in the history of the United States of America. The other thing about his dishonesty, he says, well, you know, in 10 years, everybody's going to pay. In 10 years, the rates revert to what they were. The other thing that he misses is that at any time between now and then, and there is a push on now, if you don't like the fact that the rates for the middle class are temporary, then vote again and make them permanent. They can do that. I want to remind people of something that gets forgotten very easily. When Ronald Reagan came into office, there were more than a dozen different tax rates, with 14% at the low end all the way up to 70% at the high end. 2 years into his presidency, he reduced those rates to a smaller number. I think it was 11, going from 12 to 50%. It stayed that way. Stayed that way pretty consistently until we got to 1988. You want to know what we had in 1988? Well, actually, in 1977, it went down to 5 tax rates. 11% at the low end, 38%, 38.5% at the high end. In 1988, we had 2 tax rates. 2. And we had 2 tax rates all the way until 1991. We had 2 tax rates. What were they? 15 and 28%. Does anybody remember how the country was doing financially, how the country was doing economically under Ronald Reagan? We went back to a 31% tax rate because certain people said, read my lips, no new taxes, and lied. And before he left office, you were back into a recession. And if you think that raising tax rates had nothing to do with that, then I question your sanity. What's the real deal here? What's the real takeaway? Because you got Jacob Lew coming out lying, talking about how this is a terrible thing. It's going to kill people. They're losing their health insurance. Oh, by the way, in this tax bill, the individual mandate has been it's been eviscerated. It is gone, which basically means Obamacare means nothing. It means nothing. There's nothing to it. There's no way you can enforce anything that matters in Obamacare as a matter of law. And now the regulations are being controlled and written and enforced by an administration that has already told the HHS department in an executive order to do everything you can to minimize cost, even if it means not complying with the letter of the law. Just change the regulations because that's how the law is implemented anyway. So Obamacare's gone, guys. Well, he didn't repeal it. Doesn't matter. If there's no individual mandate, then Obamacare doesn't matter. So what is this about, really? Why do the Democrats keep lying to you about this stuff? The deficit's going to blow up. The deficit has never blown up because of tax cuts. Never. 1960s came around. You launched a war in Vietnam. You sent a man to the moon. And you came up with this ridiculous war on poverty throughout the 1960s. And in the 1960s, you had a tax cut. Yes. Go back and listen to the 1964 State of the Union address that was given by Lyndon Johnson. And he talks about tax cut. They implemented a tax cut. So if a tax cut costs money, please explain to me how Neil Armstrong got to walk around on the moon. Please explain to me how we got to ramp up a war in Southeast Asia, because wars cost money. How did we get to do that with a tax cut? How did we launch the biggest financial boondoggle in the history of civilized man called the war on poverty if tax cuts reduce revenues? They don't. I know it. Anybody who's passed Econ 101 and has any desire to learn anything about American history knows the same thing. And everyone in Washington knows that the tax cut does not hurt tax revenues. So why do they keep telling this lie? It's real simple. If you're paying the federal government 15% of your income as opposed to 38% of your income, how much do you care what the federal government does? How much do you care what they say? And since the economy does better when the rates are lower, how likely are you to look toward government for assistance. You're less likely to even need it. And therefore, government becomes less important. And therefore, those who govern become less important. Guys, this is all about control. It's never been about money. If it's ever been about money, then they would be working every year to find out just how low they can go, because they know what that does for the Treasury. It's never been about that. It has been about making sure that you are dependent upon, respectful of, and compliant with government so that they can control as much as they can. So they're going to lie. Now, the problem they have now politically is you said you didn't like the permanent corporate tax rates. They passed, and they passed. Well, you didn't like the fact that the income tax rates for people was temporary, and now they're being told to come on board and vote them permanent. Then Democrats do not want permanent tax rates that are lower than what they were. They don't. So they're going to find a way to try and slow roll this and figure out how to make this some. Here is the problem. In 2025, when those rates are set to go back up, they're going to have an issue. And it's going to be either a presidential election issue, when they have no ideas, and after the economy is going to be having done well under lower taxation, particularly if Trump is reelected, they're going to have a problem. So they're going to start lying now to try to whittle this away. And if you let them do that, then you've given up a great deal of the momentum you had when you put somebody in office whose simple slogan was "Make America Great Again." You cannot make America great again or ever without giving the American people more of the money they earn. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, the Iranian people have decided to call on a new U.S. president. I don't think that many people are really paying attention to this, or not as many as perhaps should. The Iranians are basically protesting their government, doing so to the point that people are getting killed. This happened before, you might recall, at the beginning of the Obama presidency back in 2009. The interesting thing now is the response. But before we go to that, I want to look at the way this is being covered in the media, both anti-Trump and maybe less anti-Trump. I guess that's the best way to put it. Let's start with the anti-Trump side, and that would be NBC News. Here is their report from the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, on protests going on in Iran.
In Iran, the regime strikes back. After 4 days of anti-government protests and just as many tweets from President Donald Trump supporting protesters for finally getting wise, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani broke his silence. In a speech to his cabinet, he defended demonstrators' right to protest, but took a swipe at President Trump. This man in America who's sympathizing with us today has forgotten he called Iranians terrorists months ago, Rouhani said. He has no right to sympathize with Iranians. The unrest now deadly. 2 protesters were killed at a rally last night, officials blaming the deaths on foreign agents. Today, an official warned that protesters who cause disorder will pay the price. Iranian security forces are confronting protesters in the streets. organizing pro-government counter-protests, and shutting down social media apps like Instagram and Telegram, a highly encrypted text messaging service that's popular in Iran. Experts say President Trump's tweets won't help Iranians.
His actions in terms of travel bans, visa bans, the very nasty things he said about Iranians, these have not earned him a great deal of goodwill in Iran.
But this movement has taken on a life of its own. What started Thursday as a burst of anger against soaring prices and unemployment has widened into nationwide demonstrations, the largest since 2009. Some activists even chanting against Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. A dangerous move in a country where politics are dominated by clerics with a history of crushing dissent. Matt Bradley, NBC News.
What gets me about that is for the president of Iran to say he supports the protesters while his government is killing them. You know what? What they should have done is get hold of Colin Kaepernick so he could teach them to take a knee in a peaceful protest and have that impact the rulers of Iran. Right? On the 3rd of January, Fox News had another report. Now, but you also noticed, back to the NBC report, how it basically said that Trump had said terrible things about Iranians. No, Donald Trump has said terrible things about the Iranian government. He hasn't said anything negative about the Iranian people. That's part of the anti-Trump thing, the idea that Trump is against all kinds of people. He has said scathing things about the Iranian government for their support of terrorism and now for their abuse of their own people. He hasn't said anything about Iranians. However, that doesn't matter. Again, back on the 3rd of January, the Fox News Network came out with a slightly less anti-Trump report on the protests in Iran.
Yeah, hi, Julie. This is now the most serious internal crisis that Iran has seen in almost a decade. It started with protests against the economy, but it has morphed into this much bigger 7-8 day series of demonstrations against the religious leadership, the regime, and critically the supreme leader himself, Ayatollah Khamenei. It's unprecedented. The death toll now stands at 21 with over 1,000 arrested, and the US has said they will consider more sanctions if the regime gets violent.
We must not be silent. The people of Iran are crying out for freedom.
The US is also calling for an emergency UN meeting to discuss. This is a new wave of protesters, mainly under 25s, angry at the regime's corruption, and crucially, they come from the regime's rural, traditional strongholds. And many of them are also angry because the nuclear deal promised them sanctions relief and better quality of life. Instead, they have seen the Iranian government spend billions on Hezbollah, on Syrian wars abroad, and meddling in other countries. Now the government is responding, and they've been airing videos of counter-demonstrations across the country by tens of thousands of pro-regime supporters. But many analysts believe these crowds will have been bussed in specifically for the purpose. The regime has threatened to crack down with an iron fist, but so far they've been cautious. And at last we have heard from the Ayatollah Khamenei himself, who had remained very quiet up till now, and as ever, he blamed Iran's foreign enemies for this. Now, some people have predicted the fall of the Iranian regime, but it is too early to say that. Tens of thousands of protesters rather than the million we saw plus back in 2009. Nevertheless, it is a new series of protesters. Their rage is aimed at someone very different. So we'll see over the coming days if this escalates or perhaps if it just peters out. We just don't know. But a lot of support from the US for those rising up. Julie?
Benjamin Hall, thank you so much.
Notice this difference. When this happened before in 2009, notice how nobody either at NBC or at Fox News decided to mention the response of the prior administration. NBC took Trump's support of the protesters as being harmful to them. Maybe they forgot that back in 2009, when these good people protested and the United States did not take up for them, more than 80 of them were killed and more than 1,000 of them were jailed. So I'm not exactly sure what that's supposed to mean. So far, about 20 people have died. Now, one thing you'll say about the difference, and Donald Trump has brought up the difference, he says, well, Barack Obama said nothing in 2009. Actually, Obama did say some things. He gave some positive sounding words, but at the end of the day, what he really did was support the sovereignty of the Iranian government to do as it pleased within its borders. Now, for those who think who don't think that's a problem, well, we shouldn't meddle in the affairs of. I want to remind you what another Democrat president said more than 50 years ago at his inauguration. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and success of liberty. That was John Kennedy. He's not pledging support for anyone's sovereignty if they are opposed to the success of liberty. This gets into the difference in response. Here is Donald Trump on the 30th of December at the United Nations. He tweeted this out as part of a speech he gave there, dealing with the Iranian protest.
The entire world understands that the good people of Iran want change. And other than the vast military power of the United States, that Iran's people are what their leaders fear the most. This is what causes the regime to restrict internet access, tear down satellite dishes, shoot unarmed student protesters, and imprison political reformers.
So Trump calls them out. He calls them scared. Aside from the fact that we can kick a bone out of your behind with our military, the thing that the Iranian government fears most are its own people. We know you're scared. Maybe you should mend your ways. Maybe. Contrast that with a president who said 9 years ago that, well, we don't want to see any violence, but we definitely need to allow the Iranians to handle their internal affairs. Contrast that with what John Kennedy said at his inauguration. Which one of you would think that of those three presidents, Donald Trump, you heard his words, John F. Kennedy, I read his words, and we really don't have the words of Barack Obama. He said very little. But if I said one of these things is not like the other, one of these things just doesn't belong, I have Donald Trump and John Kennedy saying that we are going to support liberty. I have Barack Obama saying we're going to support sovereignty even if it's opposed to liberty. You don't think that makes a difference? Well, that's really not important. Really? And they're not really saying that much about Donald Trump. Well, in Iran, Fox News in their report had this. Here is real hell, a 31-year-old protest leader in Tehran who Fox News will only identify as Aziz, said in a telephone interview during the early hours of a morning. This is a real revolution against the mullahs. Iran is uprising. I thank Mr. Trump for his support, but we need more. Wait a minute. Somebody in a foreign country is thanking Donald Trump for his support of this movement. Well, did anybody thank Barack Obama back in 2009 for his saying he didn't want to see violence, but he wanted to support the sovereignty of the Iranian government. Well, they actually took to the streets to chant Obama's name in 2009. This is what they said. For those who do not speak the language of the Iranians, which I believe to be Persian, I do not know, that is translated, Obama, are you with them or are you with us? And that's what they were chanting over and over. Obama, Obama, are you with them or are you with us? Contrast that now to a guy who says, we thank Mr. Trump for his support, but we need more, versus somebody who's asking, dude, where are you at? Now, which one of these things should be said of a U.S. president? So for all you who think Kennedy was a great president, John Kennedy sounds like he would have been more on the side or leaning toward the message of Donald Trump than that of the weak sister known as Barack Hussein Obama. And now the people of Iran, instead of chanting at Obama wondering where he is because he was absent, are thanking Trump and asking for more of his help. Does anybody else see what's going on here? America, to become great again, cannot be standing for greatness and liberty within her borders only. Fortress America for the cause of liberty has never worked. We have 2 world wars to demonstrate that American isolationism never succeeds. And America went into 2 world wars horribly prepared and turned the tide for victory in both of them. Because that's what free people do. So when you had a president who was not on the side of freedom and liberty, people who know about American history, and there are people abroad who know a lot more about American history than progressives do, particularly black progressives. Black progressives can't see anything about history unless they have melanin attached to it. But they know what America stands for. They actually have read some of the founding documents. It really is only one founding document. That would be the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution just says what the limits of government are. So what is going to happen here? Remember, one of the reasons that Barack Obama didn't want to say anything about the sovereign Iranian government is because he always had it in his mind that he was going to sell his own country out in a nuclear weapons deal with Iran. Donald Trump doesn't give a rat's behind about that deal. And he basically has said that how you treat your people is more important to us than maintaining a deal that most of us don't think is a good deal to begin with. The people who think it is a good deal are simply defeatist individuals. Well, Iran's going to do something. Well, you're making sure that they can. You're giving them opportunity, you're giving them money, you're not holding them accountable. Donald Trump is looking to do all of that, and included in that is we are not going to stand idly by while you abuse your people just because you have an agreement with us. We'll see what he does. I don't know if he's going to send troops in. I don't know what he's going to do. But I do know this. If we're going to be Americans, we can't just watch this. Not as Americans. As fearful progressives, you can sit back and watch this, but not as Americans. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, last segment of this hour, I'm going to talk about actually going after progressive blacks in a way that should affect them. Of course, nothing really seems to affect them. On one of the left-leaning black pages on Facebook that I frequent, because I hunt progressive blacks, someone asked the question as to why what they called conservative blacks were not offended by the racism that was shown to Obama, and also by folks saying they wanted to take the country back in response to the Obama presidency. And I couldn't really speak because the question was so ridiculous. But let's break this down a little bit. Because the truth is, black folks who aren't liberals are offended by the way left-leaning and progressive blacks think and behave. It is painting all blacks with a terrible brush and a perception for everyone else that makes blacks look crazy. So let me get this straight. Barack Obama presided over the weakest economy in American history, never even got to 3% annualized GDP growth in any of the 8 years that he served. Never got there. Where's the racism involved in opposing that? He came up with a law that was rammed through with one party that the American people never wanted, and that was Obamacare. And they spent 7 years voting to get rid of that law. I'm not talking about Congress. I'm talking about the American people. They took Congress. The majority in the House of Representatives was lost by the Democrats specifically because of the Obamacare vote. And the people who won instead were elected to repeal Obamacare. Of course, they didn't have the Senate. They never sent enough people there to actually override a veto. But they kept sending people there, making it very clear, we don't want this law. Is that racism? It's not racism. It's a bad policy, and they didn't want it. As far as taking the country back, Barack Obama never did anything that benefited this country. Left in his hands, the country floundered. No economic growth. No workforce participation. Lowest workforce participation rates in 35 years. Of course you want to take the country back from that. Nearly 100 million people not working in the United States. Oh, I don't believe that. That's because you don't want to believe. It's not like it's not documented. And in several places. But then there are other things that are specific that really are problematic. For example, for progressive blacks to be concerned with the relatively small number of blacks who die from law enforcement encounters, but then turn around and make excuses about the at least 30 times that number that blacks kill, that's indefensible and embarrassing. It's like, as the scripture says, you strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. You're worried about the 200 or so blacks whom law enforcement kills every year, but you're not the least bit concerned about the 6,000 blacks that blacks kill every year. And the excuses are, well, you know, they're not sworn to protect and to serve. Oh, okay, so, but you want to try to claim that you're a people and it's okay for you to kill each other. So that's excusable. But these are brothers, right? Okay. It would actually be funny. It's willfully stupid, but it would be funny if it weren't for the blood. If it were not for all the blood. Let's keep going. Break some other things down. To actually push the whole her body, her choice, which is a white progressive talking point, even after nearly 20 million black children have been murdered in the womb since 1973. To pimp that narrative when you're still killing 350,000 black children annually in the womb. And when more black children are aborted than born alive in places like New York City, all while you tell that lie, Black Lives Matter, that is unconscionable hypocrisy. They keep killing us. Your women have wiped out generations of blacks. Generations. You have killed so many black children in the womb that you are no longer the largest minority group in the United States. You've been replaced. And they justify their support of abortion with a very weak argument. Well, if you're not going to care for the babies after they're born, you shouldn't say nothing if we kill them before they breathe. Really? Well, the people that you want to pay for these children didn't create these children. And every responsible person the world over tries to care for their own children that they bring into the world. But you don't want to, because you sound like slaves on the plantation, scared that massa's not going to give you enough hog maws and chitlins to feed another face. So the best thing you can do is, before you find out there's another face coming, let's kill it so we can all eat. The problem with blacks is they have no regard for life at all. And that's an embarrassment to black people who do have a regard for life, to Americans who have a regard for life, to world citizens who have a regard for life. You have no regard for life. Progressive blacks, they act like victims, they speak like victims. They're crying about how they can't get ahead in America because of the color of their skin. And they do this while real black folks come over from Africa and their skin is gun barrel blue in color in some cases. And they lap the blacks born here. They go out, they get jobs, they start businesses, they build lives. They're blacker than you'll ever be from a skin color standpoint. So what is the deal? It's not skin color. It's something else. And that's because, think about this, and this has been true since the nation's founding, imperfect as the nation is. Everyone on the planet can come here and succeed. And lately, they just kick a bone out of the behind of blacks who were born here. And they don't even need to know how to speak the language when they get here. They don't even have to hold any American currency when they arrive. They still figure it out. They figure it out. But as for blacks, the ones who are born here, you are the least married, most divorced, most bastard producing, most STD infected, least employed, and most criminal bunch of folks in the country. And instead of condemning that foolishness, instead of addressing that foolishness, instead of organizing against that foolishness, You give it nice sounding names. Black girl magic. And as for Obama, you guys never knew who he was. Progressive blacks, you never knew who he was. And you thought his complexion made his stuttering persona all right. Well, he was a very good speaker. He was nobody's good speaker unless there was a teleprompter in front of his grill. He was pathetic. And then he just bent blacks over the nearest chairs and abused them while he catered to illegals, homosexuals, Muslims, everybody but the simplistic black folks who voted for him. Under Obama, you wound up further behind whites and everyone else materially than you were under Bush. You lost ground under Obama. And let's be clear about something. The Tea Party and the GOP weren't anywhere near as offensive as black progressives and this half-white president who got more than 94% of their votes. Because Bill Clinton didn't take anything from you. He gave you all the laws that you cry about now. Now you want to say it's mass incarceration. But you asked for that stuff. And he gave you all that while he was raping half the women in the civilized world, and Hillary helped. Bush didn't take anything from you. He did not. As a matter of fact, if you go say his name in Africa, see if a parade doesn't break out in his honor for what he did regarding HIV and AIDS on that continent. Blacks in America are the most racist people in the country, and there's at least one poll, and you know how liberals like polls. They love them some polls. There's at least one poll that demonstrates that blacks are more racist in their thinking than whites. And the interesting thing about that is what you get is blacks coming up with this interesting narrative that they can't be racist because racism requires power. You have to have power over somebody. No, you don't. You just have to have hatred. And if you don't think blacks, particularly progressive blacks, don't hate people, then you don't know much about progressive blacks. They're the worst racists in the country. Now, nobody who cares about blacks gives a rat's behind about Barack Obama or his spouse, especially after they saw how much he supposedly cared for blacks, which is really not at all. As a result, progressive blacks just really aren't about anything except crying and worrying about what white folks are doing. And that's why, for my part, that's why I am always on the attack with regard to them. Always. And I do mean always. Now, others who come after progressive blacks may share my reasoning, or they may have reasons of their own. But that's how I answered that question. At some point, you really have to get into the notion of understanding just how messed up mentally and spiritually progressive black people are. The black people who are progressives today could never have put together or prosecuted a civil rights movement. They could not. Why? Because they lacked the character. They lacked the moral integrity. Are you trying to say more? I said, yes, just because blacks were poor didn't mean they were immoral. That is one of the things that was always the case. Blacks were not considered immoral. They were considered some other things, But black families? No. Now, of course, there's hardly any black families. Only 36% of black men, only 32% of black men are married to anybody, and only 26% of black women are married to anybody. You can't have a people without marriage. Let me just make this clear. You cannot have a community, you cannot have a people without marriage. And blacks have abandoned marriage. You can't have a people if you are self-genocidal. And blacks are self-genocidal, whether on the street or in the womb. That's just the way it is. So the idea that racism was the reason people opposed Barack Obama, no. The idea that racism is why anybody should be concerned about how Barack Obama was treated, no. I just come to you and say, how did he treat you? How did he treat you when he threw you aside for homosexuals, when he threw you aside for illegal immigrants, when he threw you aside for Islam? Where was your, didn't you take a number in that deli line? When did your number ever come up? Because it's not like he wasn't doing things for specific groups. You simply were never one of them. And now you're still stuck in groupie mindset about someone who never cared about you. And then you wonder why people think you're an embarrassment. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards. And then after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
We recently witnessed the Dow surpassing the 25,000 mark. Numerous major corporations are expanding operations, and Donald Trump's tax cuts are coming to fruition. But killjoy Democrats want to derail the Trump tax cut train. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, Mr. I Want to Tax Everything That Moves and Breathes, New York Governor Cuomo said that his overtaxed, in-debt Commonwealth of New York is going to sue over the new tax law, which he said would harm his state through its limit on state and local tax deductions. The new tax law caps the state local tax SALT deductions at $10,000, which has been a particular concern for elected officials in New York and other high-tax states. And that's where the problem is, high-tax states. Mr. Cuomo, long before Donald Trump ran for office, New York was for decades overtaxing both residents and businesses. Your government and those before you accumulated a huge debt of over $62 billion. Why not do the right thing, sir, and lower your state tax and spending madness? You purposely ignore the successes of Florida and Texas, which have both lower taxes and budget surpluses. Maybe you should be sued for overtaxation, inhibiting regulations, and asinine spending levels. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.net. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Now, this is something that I found just fascinating. In Baltimore, residents are blaming record high murder rate on a lower police presence. Okay? So what are we seeing? What are we seeing with that? Third year in a row, and this is from NPR. For the third year in a row, Baltimore, Maryland has had more than 300 murders, reaching a new record of murders per number of residents in 2017. Some residents attribute the high murder rate to relaxed police patrols in the city following high-profile cases of police brutality. Well, not cases, there's case. Officers have backed off in neighborhoods like the one where Freddie Gray was arrested. Freddie Gray is all this is about. That's all this is about. The Reverend Kenji Scott, a pastor in Baltimore who's held positions in local city government, says the opposite needs to happen. We wanted the police there. We wanted them engaged in the community. We didn't want them beating the hell out of us. We didn't want that. Here is my question. What were you going to do in your community? Because you knew you had people like Freddie Gray in that community. Freddie Gray had more court cases than he had birthdays. Freddie Gray was a problem child. And he brought everything that happened to him upon himself. Oh, are you trying to say he killed himself? We'll get back to that. But let's not forget that this was a Black Lives Matter moment. You had the riots, you had the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, you had Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney, you had the mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, and Rawlings Blake was out there saying, you know what, if 3 black women can't get justice for Freddie Gray, where are we going to get it from? Well, where did you get it from? Did you get it? And what do you consider justice? So this is interesting to me that they went through this exercise, and as a result, they compromised the safety of the city. What do you mean? Well, by now we can go back and take a look. Freddie Gray was arrested, thrown in the back of a van, driven from one place to another. And when he got to that other place, he was injured, and those injuries proved fatal. The knee-jerk reaction with no proof at all, no proof, pretty much a circumstantial. Well, if he was in your car and he wasn't hurt when he got in, but he was when he got out, then you must have done something to him. No, that just doesn't pan out. But that's what they did. So they went with this to say we want justice for blacks against police brutality. And Marilyn Mosby, bless her little silly heart, was at the forefront of this thing, but it didn't really turn out that well for her. Let's kind of take this by the numbers. There was the moment when she came out and announced that she was indicting 6 officers.
As I previously indicated, my office conducted an independent investigation into the circumstances surrounding the tragic incident with the death of Freddie Gray. On May 1st, our investigation revealed that we had sufficient probable cause to bring charges against 6 police officers. As our investigation has continued, additional information has been discovered, and as is often the case, during an ongoing investigation, charges can and should be revised based upon the evidence. These past 2 weeks, my team has been presenting evidence to a grand jury that just today returned indictments against all 6 officers for the following offenses. Officer Cesar Goodson, Jr., second degree, depraved heart murder, involuntary manslaughter, second degree negligent assault, manslaughter by vehicle and gross negligence, manslaughter by vehicle, criminal negligence, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding safety of a prisoner, reckless endangerment. Officer William Porter, involuntary manslaughter, second degree negligent assault, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding the safety of a prisoner, and reckless endangerment. Lieutenant Brian Rice, involuntary manslaughter, second degree negligent assault, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding safety of a prisoner, and an illegal arrest, reckless endangerment. Officer Edward Nero, second degree intentional assault, misconduct in office for an illegal arrest, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding safety of a prisoner, and reckless endangerment. Officer Garrett Miller, second degree intentional assault, misconduct in office for an illegal arrest, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding the safety of a prisoner, and reckless endangerment. Sergeant Alicia White, involuntary manslaughter, second degree negligent assault, misconduct in office for failure to perform a duty regarding safety of a prisoner, and reckless endangerment. Now that the grand jury has also found probable cause to charge the aforementioned officers based upon the evidence, these officers, who are presumed innocent until proven guilty, are now scheduled to be arraigned on July 2nd. Thank you.
I like how she throws in the bogus line because she doesn't believe it. Innocent until proven guilty. Because remember, her whole thing was we're out to get justice for Freddie Gray. If we're out to get justice for Freddie Gray, then you're not out to get justice for the police officers. Because justice means we're going to get to the truth. And the truth exonerates or condemns whomever it will. You already had it in your mind that the police officers needed to go down. That's why you did what you did. However, it didn't go quite the way that the state's attorney for the city of Baltimore wanted it to go.
State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby won praise when she announced charges against 6 officers just days into the investigation into 25-year-old Freddie Gray, who died of injuries sustained in the back of a police van. Mosby has also faced criticism for acting too hastily and overreaching in the charges. Closing arguments start today in the case against van driver Cesar Goodson, who is on trial for the most serious of the charges, second-degree depraved heart murder. If he fails to get convicted, Mosby will be 0 for 3, a record that will certainly tarnish her reputation.
And she did go 0 for 3. She didn't convict any of those first 3 officers. And if you remember, because I do, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not there was going to be a change of venue, how this was going to be done. And there was no way that 6 police officers in Baltimore were going to get a fair trial by jury. As a result, most of them opted for bench trials. In other words, they had it heard by a judge. And at least one of those cases, if not more, was presented to a black judge who went out of his way to tell the prosecutor effectively, you don't really have a case here. I don't know what we're doing here, but you don't have a case. And after going 0 for 3, Marilyn Mosby kind of did a reevaluation and came to this conclusion.
My professional role in this matter is plain: to seek justice on behalf of an innocent 25-year-old man who was unreasonably taken into custody after fleeing in his neighborhood, which just happens to be a high-crime neighborhood, and had his spine partially severed in the back of a Baltimore police wagon. For those that believe that I'm anti-police, it's simply not the case. I'm anti-police brutality, and I need not remind you that the only loss and the greatest loss in all of this was that of Freddie Gray's life. We do not believe that Freddie Gray killed himself. We stand by the medical examiner's determination that Freddie Gray's death was a homicide. However, after much thought and prayer, it has become clear to me that without being able to work with an independent investigatory agency from the very start, without having a say in the election of whether our cases proceed in front of a judge or a jury, without communal oversight of policing in this community, without real substantive reforms to the current criminal justice system, we could try this case 100 times and cases just like it, and we would still end up with the same result. Accordingly, I have decided not to proceed on the cases against Officer Garrett, Sergeant Alicia White, or to relitigate the case against William Porter. What I've learned through this experience is that every battle, every hurdle, every obstacle that we've overcome since the pursuit of these cases has brought us one step closer to equality, and that any and every step towards equality in our justice system is well worth fighting for. This system is in need of reform, and when it comes to police accountability, and as long as I'm the chief prosecutor for this city, I vow to you that my office and I will fight. We will fight for a fair and equitable justice system for all, so that whatever happened to Freddie Gray never happens to another person in this community again. Thank you.
All that to announce that she's dropping the case. That's all that was. And she's dropping the case because she recognizes she can't get a conviction. She can't get a conviction because she has no case. Her evidence is flawed. Her evidence doesn't prove anyone at fault that she charged. And notice what she said. You know, her professional responsibility was to seek justice for Freddie Gray. That's not the role of the prosecutor. The prosecutor's role is to seek justice, period. You want to already say what justice is before you even try the case. And then after you get pimp slapped 3 times before a court, you still want to try to say that your case is good. Now, let's not forget, Mosby was criticized by Alan Dershowitz. People made a move to disbar her simply because this was silly. She had no case. But all this was done in order to try to get the consent decree against Baltimore, against the Baltimore Police Department, and therefore to push progressivism further down upon the people of the city of Baltimore. What they did not take into account was that police are human beings too. And you made the very clear statement that if we do our jobs aggressively, you're going to prosecute us. Okay, well, fine. We understand. We don't want to be prosecuted. Why would we? We're just not going to do that. We're going to sit back because it's not our job to prevent crime. Let me help you out. It's not the police responsibility to prevent crime. The police responsibility is to investigate crime. You can't investigate what hasn't happened. So proactive policing is over and above. Proactive policing is what got Freddie Gray arrested. And then you went ahead and prosecuted people. And don't forget, when you prosecute these folks, it costs them money. Had they been convicted, it would have cost them their retirement, all this other stuff. So you did that. So what do you think the message was to everyone else who's a police officer in Baltimore? Don't do that, man. You see some kid running, let him go. You see somebody doing something wrong and it's questionable, let it go. And as a result, for the 3rd year in a row, Baltimore, Maryland has had 300 murders. 300. And what they want to do is blame the police. No, the blame resides with city government. The blame resides with the former mayor, Stephanie Rawlings Blake. The blame resides with Marilyn Mosby. The blame resides with people who do not understand how this whole thing works and who refuse to take control of their own community, leaving it to other people to do. So this is just something in the category of play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You want to prosecute police for non-crimes, then expect them to let crimes go. You charge 6 cops in the death of a drug addict and dealer who had more court cases than birthdays, was breaking the law when he was arrested. And despite what Marilyn Mosby says, we don't believe that Freddie Gray killed himself. Really? But Freddie Gray had a history of injuring himself in police custody. Baltimore Sun put that out there in December of 2015. Freddie Gray alleged back injury detailed in unsealed report. So, you got... This is interesting on many levels. But you got to remember, after this happened, the mayor told the police to stand down so folks could have space to destroy during riots. And then she paid the dead guy's family lottery money, $6.5 million. For what? And again, not one single officer was convicted. Not one. You charge us for doing our jobs. You drag us through the mud. You upend our lives. And we know we didn't do anything wrong, and you can't prove that we did anything wrong. So you sent the message that the police should back off. So all the people out there who don't want the police to back off, let me tell you what you need to do. You need to go to those progressives, like your mayor, like your city government, your council, your state's attorney, and you need to tell all these people, you need to back down. You need to get behind the cops instead of getting in opposition to the cops. That's what you need to do. And until you do, the blood will continue to flow in Baltimore. 3 years running now. And as nobody seems to be repentant in Baltimore about this case, don't expect that anything's going to change anytime soon. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's get into this swamp thing a little bit. When Donald Trump was a candidate, he indicated that he was interested in, quote-unquote, draining the swamp. And he also indicated that he was uniquely qualified to do that because he understood how the swamp worked. He'd been part of it. And since he's been in office, certain things have gotten exposed that were never exposed under Obama. They were not exposed under Bush. They were not exposed under Clinton. They weren't even exposed. You can go all the way back to Reagan. They weren't even exposed. But now they're coming out because one man decided to run a presidential campaign on the premise that he was going to do things for middle-class Americans. And what people have chosen not to see, and a lot of that is because there's a significant effort to block your view of all this stuff. The government is designed, the federal government is designed to extract from the middle class and the upper middle class so that they don't know what's going on and that they continue to fund a fraudulent government. We have a bad government. I mean, we really do. But now what we're dealing with, and what do I mean by a bad government? We have a government that does not respect economic liberty of its citizens. We have a government that does not respect religious liberty of its citizens. We have a government that questions the right of the people to be armed. And now what we have is someone who is supporting all those things, and he won. And that does not sit well with any of the progressives. On election night, Van Jones was on CNN, and he had this to say regarding the election result.
Well, look, first of all, congratulations. Both of you guys were...
We're not there yet.
Well, you're further than anybody said you would be. And I have enough class, and I was raised well enough to say when you outdo...
Yes, sir. Thank you.
When you outdo expectations, good for you. But there's another side to this. People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race. I mean, we've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes. And Donald Trump has a responsibility tonight to come out and reassure people that he is going to be the president of all the people who he insulted and offended and brushed aside. Yeah, when you say you want to take your country back, you got a lot of people who feel that we're not represented well either. But we don't want to feel that someone has been elected by throwing away some of us to appeal more deeply to others. So this is a deeply painful moment tonight. I know it's not just about race. There's more going on than that. But race is here, too. We got to talk about it.
Let me see if I get this straight. So for 8 years, Barack Obama didn't favor one group over another. He didn't favor illegal immigrants over citizens. He didn't favor Muslims over Christians. He didn't favor homosexuals over heterosexuals. Is that what you're telling me? So he was throwing those people away, even to the point of taking them to court to try to make sure that they understood what he wanted of them. So what was that? What type of a lash was that? A changing country. The United States of America is 65% Caucasian and has been for quite some time. So when he talks about a changing country, what the heck is he talking about? Blacks? Blacks are not growing as a percentage of people in this country. They're killing themselves in the womb and on the street. 20 million, almost 20 million children killed in the womb since 1973. about 6,000 blacks killed in the street every year, along with 350,000 abortions annually, to the point where blacks have lost their status as the largest minority group in the country. So what's the change there? You want to talk about Latinos? Latinos have overtaken blacks. But they're still only 1/6 of the country. This is not what you think it is. This whole thing about trying to tell people that America is darkening. How dark? How quickly? It's not happening like that. It really isn't. But that's what he's putting out there. Some of us are afraid to be parents tonight. Why? So let me ask you this. I'm an American. If I have to choose between satisfying those who are my countrymen and looking after their interests, or satisfying those who do not have a right to be in the country, which one deserves my attention? I think it's pretty clear. And that's what Donald Trump was saying. You have been forgotten. He was talking to the American people. He wasn't talking to simply white American people. There are plenty of blacks who have issues with illegal immigration. There are plenty of blacks who were demonstrating against the Obama administration as they were busing in illegal immigrants in California and elsewhere. There are plenty of people who have something against that because they felt they were being cast aside by their government in favor of those who should not have any right at all. So was that a white lash? I don't think so. It's an American lash. Americans believe that their government should look after them first. I don't think that's unusual. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's inappropriate. But to find out why it hasn't been that way, it wasn't that way under Obama. It really wasn't necessarily that way under Bush. Bush was not as bad as Obama, but a lot of people got left out in the lurch under Bush. What happened to veterans under Bush? What happened to veterans under Obama? All these things are being addressed now, slowly maybe, but they're being addressed with this president. Why is that? Because it's what he cares about. And what he cares about in this regard also happens to match the sentiments of the American people. Dealing with the swamp that is being accosted, because we have to recognize that there are things going on in D.C. that are just horrific. They're out of this world bad. And back on the 31st of October, Katrina Pearson made a statement regarding the swamp that I thought was very, very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you.
You have to wonder, a lot of it is going back to a situation when Mueller was running the FBI. I mean, I just asked Jason, will the Department of Justice do its job? Can they be effective with all of the conflicts surrounding Mueller?
Well, I think at this point, Maria, they really don't have a choice. You know, when I came to D.C., a friend of mine told me, you don't go to D.C. to change it. You go to D.C. to expose it, and then the people will change it. And I think there's one thing that President Trump has been very successful in doing, along with being a candidate Trump, is exposing a number of things that have been happening in the swamp, which is exactly why people have wanted to drain it. And now that this has been exposed, you see all of the slimy politics involved. You see all of the lobbying and how they skirt the rules and how this Podesta group just recently filed its FAR registration. People see what's going on. They don't like it. They don't have a choice but to investigate it. And now when we get to the Podesta group, as Jason said, Tony stepped down. This is huge because they brought in Manafort to help a foreign government lobby Congress. This is a very big deal. They can't just blow past it. And now it looks like the swamp is about to drain itself.
Podesta's main job was to lobby against sanctions against Russia and Ukraine. And there's no discussion whatsoever, and yet we're still talking about collusion with Trump. It's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. How is it that the very thing that you're going after Donald Trump about, which you cannot find any evidence that occurred, you harp on that, but the very low-hanging fruit that demonstrates that his opposition in the election engaged in the very things for which you are investigating Trump, how does that get ignored? How does pedophilia in Washington, D.C., which is now being exposed, despite the efforts of the press to keep it under wraps, how does that stay under wraps? But people are figuring it out. How is it that people are now seeing that the EPA, which has always been a hindrance to economic liberty and individual liberty for the citizens of this country, they're just now finding out how bad it is, and Donald Trump has made it very clear that certain things won't be tolerated, and as a result, people are leaving that organization in droves. It's been exposed. The DOJ has been exposed. The FBI has been exposed. Robert Mueller has been exposed. His conflicts of interest are just, they're so obvious. They are so blatant. And he has found nothing. He has found nothing. Well, he has two convictions. He convicted people for nothing having to do with Donald Trump and collusion. Nothing. So what good was that? We have to really get to the point where we understand what's going on. The American people are now getting a more clear view of their government, and it's very ugly. They're seeing that the intelligence community is corrupt. They're seeing that the FBI is corrupt. They're seeing that the Department of Justice is not the cleanest place. They're seeing that the EPA was a very corrupt place, although it's cleaning. It's becoming self-cleaning. They're seeing all these things. And the American-lash, where people put their confidence in Donald Trump to address their issues, has nothing to do with color. Does it have something to do with class? You know, the thing I always have to be careful of is you cannot adopt the lexicon of progressives, because they choose their words very carefully so that you can only argue on their terms. There is no such thing in the current discussion in America. It's not about Republicans and Democrats. It's not about conservatives and liberals. It is simply about progressives and Americans. Once you decide that you're going to be a government, an American government, in favor of Americans, then certain people are going to be pushed aside, and they should be. They should be, just as they are in other countries. The French do not take care of other people ahead of taking care of the French. Mexico? No. Pick a country. Except for some of the clowns in Western Europe, and you see how that's going. This is about taking America back. What does that mean? Putting the American people at the center of what the government does as part of its necessary functions. Serve the people. Serve the citizenry. Serve them first. Serve them always. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. I'm going to go in on this black girl magic phenomenon. And for those who don't know, I'm not a fan. I think it is ridiculous. Now, when I say that, it is not because I do not believe that black women should not mark or remember pleasant things about themselves. Don't think that. But I don't think you should do that with the intent of intentionally overlooking some tremendous harm that's being done. Instead, black girl magic should not be about, oh, look at the good things we do. Black girl magic should be about, why don't we just do good things instead of anything else? But it's not. Huffington Post came up with something back in January of 2016 to, quote unquote, explain black girl magic.
You've probably seen the hashtag Black Girl Magic. And if you haven't, do yourself a favor and search it. You won't be disappointed. Why? Well, listen up. Black Girl Magic is a term used to illustrate the universal awesomeness of black women. It's about celebrating anything we deem particularly dope, inspiring, or mind-blowing about ourselves. For example, it's Serena Williams looking like the queen that she is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And Misty Copeland becoming the first black female dancer to be named principal ballerina at the American Ballet Theater. It's Viola Davis buying the Ava DuVernay Barbie doll for her daughter. Too cute. It's model Maria Borges rocking her natural hair on the Victoria's Secret's runway. It's Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney in Baltimore, getting her boss on by taking charge and seeking justice in the Freddie Gray case. It's Michelle Obama. Enough said. Oh, and the oldest woman in the world is black. And fierce. But Black Girl Magic is also the awesomeness we sprinkle on the world every single day. It's when your curls are on fleek, your braids are tight, and your hair is laid for the gods. Or when you're serving a fierce look that deserves some serious camera time. And remember when you finally hit that yoga pose you've been working on? That's Black Girl Magic. It's most definitely getting that degree. It's also accomplishing our dreams and being recognized for them. It's friendship, sisterhood, motherhood, and so much more. Hashtag relationship goals. It's just us brown girls living our best lives, period. And yes, we know all women are magical, but this right here, this is an opportunity for black women to stand in our dopeness. Tell us what you think Black Girl Magic means. And then next time you're in the presence of a black woman, take a moment to bask in her magic.
I'm not about to bask in anything with respect to this foolishness. If you listen to what she said, none of it was really of substance. Hair, yoga poses. Really? I look good. I'm giving off a fierce look. What does that have to do with? That's your idea of magic. It really isn't. Let me tell you what I understand black girl magic to be. It's a combination of womanism from the 1970s. Womanism, for those who don't know, was simply the black version of white feminism. That's all it is. And you put that together with the buzz phrase whataboutism, by which one group deflects responsibility for their negative actions by coming up with moral equivalence, citing another group's misdeeds. This is black women trying to get attention for what doesn't matter about themselves, so that they can, among other things, ignore some tremendously destructive things that do matter. This is just progressivism. And to be honest, black girl magic comes out of the reaction to decades of progressivism assaulting the femininity of black women. Because you got to remember, feminism encouraged black women to remove black men from the home in exchange for a government check. And if you think that was not an assault on their femininity, so they would no longer be under the headship of the black man, then you don't understand what femininity is. But as a result, I think a lot of black women, they feel devalued because of progressivism and are convinced that they are unfairly attacked. But that's really because they don't want to see a relationship between their behavior and its consequences that directly result from progressivism and any criticism that they might receive as a group. As a result, black girl magic is an effort to mask the continued destruction of American black men and the crippling of the American black nuclear family by leveraging emotions aroused in many black females by their high levels of insecurity. If you do not think that there are not a whole lot of insecure, progressive black females out there, you're wrong. They also have an intense inability to accept just criticism for what they have brought the black woman to. And their inability to accept criticism is so intense that they will not even acknowledge the things that they do. For example, black females are this country's least family supportive group. Compared to other women in the U.S., they are less married at 26%. 26% of black women are married. And more divorced than any other females in the country. They have a 77.3% illegitimacy rate. Remember when it was only 72.3? Now it's up to 77.3. By the way, the illegitimacy rate for whites, 30%, which is still horrific. But you're more than 2.5 times what's already horrific. Black females have abortion rates that are nearly triple that of whites and 50% higher than the abortion rate of Latinos. I want to know where the magic is in all this. We don't want to talk about that. Wait a minute. This is much more consequential to black people than whether or not your curls are on fleek, whether or not you're rocking your natural hair, whether or not Serena Williams is on a magazine cover, whether or not Misty Copeland can dance. These things are much more significant and consequential. Black females have STD infection rates that dwarf those of other women. According to the CDC, 48% of black females are infected with genital herpes. 48%, nearly 1 of 2. White females, about 16. Black men are number 2, and they're at 24%. you're twice as bad as the next group. None of these things are what anyone should consider magical, because they're not. There's been a lot said about public officials, black women winning office. You have a black female mayor in Atlanta. That's not unheard of. That's happened before. But the truth of the matter is, as public officials, blacks seem to be the most troubled female public officials, not named Hillary Clinton. If you just look at some of their high-profile missteps. Mayors of Baltimore, for example, were convicted of theft, or convicted of crimes, and another one abandoned her city to rioters, saying we need to give them space to destroy. Congresswoman Corrine Brown was convicted of theft from a bogus charity that she made up. The Chicago school CEO stole money from the district. Atlanta's school superintendent cheated her students and got teachers jailed. This is what happens. And when you add to that a 5-decade history of exchanging black men in the home for government checks, which has indelibly changed black fatherhood and parenting, and not for the better. And then if you add to that black women, their disproportionate support of homosexuality, which benefits no people of any color, you cannot find a utility, a positive utility for homosexuality. When you put all these things together, there's a lot of non-magic for which the black female should be answering. Now, what I want to do is have you bear in mind that these are relatively recent developments. Black females prior to 1970 were more conservative than they are now, much more family-oriented, less selfish, more supportive of black men and families. And with their support, black people revised America's political landscape. And those women prior to 1970 bear almost no resemblance in philosophy or values to what has become prevalent in today's black culture. And of course, should anyone, including other black women, find fault with any of these latter-day black females or their behavior, the response invariably is to claim racism, sexism, self-hatred on the part of those who simply call attention to the truth. Then this is followed by fervent affirmation of the beauty and strength of the black woman when neither of those attributes is being displayed. I'm sorry, when you're killing children in the womb, there is neither beauty or strength being put on display. When you are destroying the family by opting for a government check over the black man in the home, there is neither beauty nor strength in that. None. Now be clear about this. The problem with black females is their practice of and sympathy that they show toward progressivism. That's what's killed nearly 20 million children. That's what has put the black nuclear family and its values on the endangered species list. That is what has compromised black men to the point where they really don't stand up for themselves, don't take charge of their community, because they are so afraid of offending these quote-unquote magical black girls. Let me tell you something about this behavior. It is the behavior of girls. It is immature behavior. However, this isn't black behavior. And there's nothing magic about it. All this is something that black women need to change. Now, to do that, they're going to have to let go of the idea that they are wonderful in spite of what they do. You can't be wonderful in spite of what you do. You have to be wonderful because of what you do. Getting your hair done doesn't make you wonderful. It doesn't. Hitting a yoga pose doesn't make you wonderful. Getting your degree, and don't get me wrong, I don't see any problem with women getting education. Go for it. My mother had a college degree. Both of my sisters have advanced degrees. I don't have anything against that. But you can't sit up here and try to hang these things in the balance and try to say that a woman with a degree, that's magic, when I have all these women who are doing damage to black people. And where are all these quote-unquote magical black women taking on these problems and making a difference so that they don't stand out to the extent that they do? I don't see it. Do you? They need to change. But it is unlikely that that change is going to come in the near term. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. And, of course, we hope to be back with you next week. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.